For those who would like to download their own copy of the handout, I'm putting it into the chat. It was also on the WhatsApp. And putting this into the YouTube chat as well. Whoops, that was the Zoom link. Well, people will figure that out. That. That. That over there. And share screen. Looks like people are logging in. Good to see. Everyone can see the the screen all right with the PDF?
Yes, yes.
All right. Looks like a few more people are logging in, so we'll give it a couple more minutes as everyone sorts out the technology.
Yeah, I'm not a week late to this starting back up, am I? Couldn't quite figure out the math. I know
No, you're doing fine.
Okay, good deal.
No, the last 2 weeks, because of Pesach, we were not able to have class on Thursday nights. So that means it's been about 3 weeks or so since our last class.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, I got into a pretty decent argument with my fiance over the fact that Pesach was 8 days and not 7. So
well, you know, it's a good argument to have. I think I covered that in one of my earlier classes on the overall holidays, but just as we're waiting for more people to finish their login, just a quick reminder on that point. The idea is that in the Torah itself, the holiday of Passover is 7 days. The holiday of Shavuot is 1 day, and the holiday of Sukkot is 7 days, and Shmini Atzeret is 1 day. Shmini Atzeret coming right after the 7 days of Sukkot. But in the early days, when the Jewish people began to get a little bit further away from the center of the land, it was often difficult to get the announcement of when a month had begun, which was done by visual sighting, not by calendar calculations, out to the outlying communities. And so communities would celebrate an extra day to make sure that they were covering the 2 days that were possible as the holiday for that month. Over time, we got better calculations. Well, rather, over time, we turned to calculations rather than the visual sightings of the new moon. But for those who live outside of Israel, we still maintain the extra day as part of our practice. If you lived in Israel, then you would be only celebrating it for the 7, 1, and 7 and 1 days for the different holidays, respectively. So the short answer is you're both right. Yes, Aaron.
Rabbi, does Yom Yerushalayim, how many people count that as a modern Jewish holiday?
Well, we're going to be talking about it tonight, so I'm at least one.
Gotcha.
I was going to say, because that one might be a little political, right?
No, not really. We'll get to that. It's actually the most recent of the modern holidays to have been added. So that's going to be at the end of tonight's discussion. So you're going to have to stick around till then.
Right. But if you accepted a lot of those peace plans, it would go away, right?
No, actually not. But I would suggest bringing up the topic when we get to the end and everyone knows what we're talking about.
All right.
All right, so I think we are at our expected capacity, just checking to see if there's anyone else watching through the other means. I've got the extra chat box open. All right, we're going to go ahead and get going. And if other people join in, well, that's fine. If they haven't joined in yet, they can always catch it on the rerun on YouTube. So we've missed 2 weeks of class because of the holiday of Pesach, which is a very good reason to miss classes. Celebrating the holidays is a very important part of Jewish life. However, that means we're a little behind where I would have liked to have been, because the first holiday we're going to talk about in the modern pantheon of holidays has already passed. We missed it by a couple days for the class. But that's okay, because talking about it now will help you be prepared for next year. And of course, the rest of the holidays we're discussing, thankfully, are coming up in the near future, and you'll have a chance to experience them as well. Although, as we continue to go through our COVID-19 social distancing, you will not be experiencing them in the way that we normally experience these holidays, because there's a good chance that we will still not be gathering, certainly not in large groups, by the time these holidays roll around. So just bear that in mind, that it may be a full year before you get the full sense of these holidays. So let's go ahead and flip a slide and talk about the 20th century. I know it's ancient history now as we stand in the year 2020, but the 20th century saw a lot of changes for the Jewish world. We've talked about this briefly, and I will go into much more depth on the history of the 20th century in a later class. But in the 20th century, we saw mass persecution in Europe, which led in large part to mass immigration to the USA and the area that was then known as Palestine. This also led, not the immigration, but the immigration, the persecution, and everything that was going on led to a mass upheaval in Jewish communal life. Unfortunately, this was also something that was eventually brought to its worst point by the Holocaust, as the murder of more than 6 million Jews took place as a culmination of the anti-Semitism and persecution that had been rising in Europe for centuries. However, we also saw in the 20th century the miraculous rebirth of Israel as a state. So needless to say, the 20th century had a lot of highs, and it also had a lot of lows. And if you've learned anything about Judaism so far, it's we care about our history, and we care about finding ways to commemorate and celebrate our history. So it should come as no surprise that many of the events of the 20th century have now become part of the Jewish holiday cycle. So everything we're talking about is essentially born out of the 20th century's events. Everyone with me so far? Okay. So Israel, the state, not Israel, the people, right? Remember, the people of Israel are in every country, but the country of Israel, meaning Medinat Yisrael, the political entity of Israel, has a very unique position for the first time in a couple thousand years, which is to say the state of Israel, as opposed to the people of Israel, is in a position to actually make certain days considered special, the same way any other government around the world can do it. For example, if you are an American living in Spain and the United States is celebrating the 4th of July, you will also be thinking about the 4th of July because the United States government made that a holiday. Same thing with President's Day or Memorial Day or any of the other days that have been made special days by the US government. Those will often be felt as special, even if you are not living in the United States, even if you're not necessarily a citizen of the United States, but still have American heritage. Israel is in a unique position because we have not had a government that was able to do something like this for a very, very long time. And even when we did have a government, it wasn't always doing things that were recognized as being valid. We haven't had a legitimate government that had complete independence within the land of Israel for well over 2,000 years. So this new state of Israel has taken the bull by the horn and has actually established a number of holidays that are now followed by Jews around the world. And the three that have been had the biggest impact are Yom HaShoah, Yom HaZikaron, and Yom HaAtzmaut. The fourth one that we will talk about is called Yom Yerushalayim. That has had a smaller impact, but it's still very important to learn about. Aaron, you raised your hand. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, with the holidays, you said the government did it, but didn't the rabbis create a lot of the modern holidays?
No, they did not. All of the holidays that are on this list were created by a passage of a law by the Knesset. Now, did rabbis involve themselves in how they should be celebrated? Did rabbis join in the discussion of when they should be set? Absolutely. But the formal establishment of these holidays was established by the political secular government of the state of Israel, of Medinat Yisrael, passed like any other law by the Knesset, essentially the Congress of Israel.
All right.
So this is something that is, of course, a little bit different than what we have been used to, especially in the United States, where in the United States, the American government, the Congress, whether it be a state Congress or whether it be a state legislature or the national legislature, is not in the habit of making holidays that have a religious layer to them. Israel does not mind doing such things. But like I said, the real fulfillment of these holidays, how they've been celebrated and commemorated, goes beyond what the initial law was. And we have developed rituals and liturgy and prayers that cooperate with the establishment of these holidays. With that in mind, let's run through them. Yom HaShoah, which is commemorated on the 27th day of the Hebrew month of Nisan. To give you your bearings, the 14th, 15th of Nisan are the days that are beginning the holiday of Pesach. So the 27th day of Nisan is about 12 days after the beginning of Pesach, or about 5, give or take if you live in Israel or outside, as we talked about at the beginning, about 5 days after the end of Passover. Now, the official name of Yom HaShoah is actually Yom HaZikaron LaShoah VeLaGvura, which in English would be translated as the Day of Remembrance for the Holocaust and Heroism. And this was established by the government of Israel in 1953. Now, why would they actually call it this Yom HaZikaron LaShoah VeLaGvura? Why would they have this, and why has it been shortened? Well, that's a very interesting historical question. This day was originally established to commemorate not just those who were killed in the Holocaust, but also those who fought back during the Holocaust. Originally, in fact, the day was planned to coincide with the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising of 1943, which was the largest armed rebellion by Jews against the Nazis during the entire war. There were many other uprisings and camp revolts, but the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was the largest. And the idea was we should have this be on the day that they did it. Well, that's the 14th day of Nisan, which is the day when we are just finishing our preparations for Pesach. Doesn't exactly work. We've already got this holiday there. It's called Passover. Trying to do Yom HaShoah, trying to do a day that is talking about the Holocaust, literally on the doorstep of the holiday of Pesach, just did not seem to fit into that plan. And so instead, it was decided to move it to 8 days, a little more than a week, in front of Yom HaAtzmaut, which, as we'll talk about, is Israel's Independence Day. Everyone with me and the logic so far?
Yep.
Okay. So what happens on Yom HaShoah? Well, at 10 a.m. in Israel, sirens, air raid sirens will wail throughout the country, and they will go for 2 minutes. And everything, and I mean everything in the entire country, stops. If you are driving, you pull over your car to the side of the road and you get out of your car and you stand. If you are working, you stop whatever you're doing and you stand. And for 2 minutes, the entire country comes to a standstill. This is a lengthy moment of reflection and silence in honor of those who perished during the Holocaust. And for the entire day, throughout that day, places of entertainment are legally closed, meaning you're not going to be going to a concert, you're not going to be going to a movie theater, you're not going to be going to anything like that. TV stations will carry only coverage of commemoration ceremonies or documentaries about the Holocaust, and radio stations only play somber music for the whole day. It is a very unique experience, and it is very much in keeping with the traditions of Judaism of how we show our mourning whenever we are commemorating a tragic event. Okay. Now, there was a debate about exactly whether or not Yom HaShoah should be where it is, or whether Yom HaShoah should have been some other time. So the chief rabbi of Israel in 1949, he had actually proclaimed that the 10th of Tevet was the appropriate remembrance for the day. And his argument was there was already a fast day in commemoration of the siege of Jerusalem, and it was not during the month of Nisan. The month of Nisan, when we celebrate Pesach, is considered to be a joyful month. And doing something voluntarily, which deliberately depresses us and takes away from that joy, was considered to be inappropriate. So the chief rabbi had aimed for doing this in Tevet so as not to interfere with our celebration of Nisan and then of Passover. Other rabbis suggested that the entire commemoration should just be rolled into Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, which we'll talk about in a later day, as that is already set aside as the saddest day of the year. However, the prevailing belief in the country and really globally was that the Shoah, the Holocaust, needed a separate day of commemoration and one near one of the most famous moments of resistance. And that last point I just want to dwell on a little bit more. When Israel was establishing itself all the way through the early parts of the 20th century, but especially after the Holocaust, and as it was absorbing the refugees from Europe and then later absorbing the refugees from the Arab nations, it was very important to its own conception of itself that it not be solely thought of as being an offshoot of the Holocaust, and that the people who were founding the state and who were making it thrive not be thought only as similar to those who went without fighting to their deaths during the Holocaust. And so they very much wanted to make sure that the commemoration of the Holocaust would include a celebration of the heroism of those who resisted, as that spirit was very important to the self-perception of the Israelis, especially during those early years, although that, of course, continues. As I mentioned, however, in the long run, the focus on the destruction of the Holocaust did become the more dominant theme of the day, and it does continue to be, especially outside of Israel, the main focus of Yom HaShoah commemorations and observances. Onward. All right. Oh, there we go. Now, the conservative movement, we have actually added a few additional things to the prayers and to our own commemoration. So we have a special prayer in the Amidah, which can be found if you are using a conservative movement prayer book. And we have also created a Yom HaShoah scroll, which is a special collection of readings and prayers that help us to commemorate this day. You can find information about the Yom HaShoah scroll online if you just do a quick search. Many important commemorative and educational events also take place on or near this day in communities around the world. This year, it's a little different. We didn't have quite as much going on in town, but if you were paying attention to different emails from local and national organizations, there were many online events that were taking place when Yom HaShoah came earlier this week. Any final questions on Yom HaShoah? Okay. All right, on to our next holiday. This one is more of a happy holiday. Yom Ha'atzmaut, or Independence Day, which was on the 5th of Iyar, which was May 14th, 1948. So we will go into much more detail about how Israel became an independent state and what has happened since in a later class. But for now, just know that the United Nations voted on November 29th, 1947, to outline the establishment of the Jewish and Palestinian states in the British Mandate of Palestine. Remember that the British were in control of that part of the world following World War I. And the United Nations had taken over following World War II. And the United Nations voted that there should indeed be both a Jewish as well as a non-Jewish state within the borders of what was the British Mandate of Palestine. The UN vote took place on November 29th, 47. The British agreed that this was fair, and they saw there would be trouble, but they were happy to hand over control on midnight of May 14th, 1948. The Jewish groups agreed as well, and they declared independence on May 14th, 1948. The Arab nations, which were primarily not living in the territory, meaning the surrounding countries of Egypt and Syria and Saudi Arabia and Jordan and Lebanon and Iraq, they all said, no, we do not agree with this partition at all. And they declared war on May 15th, meaning the next day. That war went on for a very long time, but eventually Israel remained, which is victory in this case. And that was then when Israel became at least momentarily secure in her new independence. So Yom HaAtzmaut is the day that Israel formally became independent, very much in keeping almost with the same style as July 4th in American history, which was a day when we proclaimed independence, even though it wasn't the day when we became actually independent from England, meaning we were still fighting a war to get our full independence, but we declared our independence on that day. So in Israel to this day, there are many, many amazing events that happen on Yom HaAtzmaut, and among them are the awarding of the Israel Prize. This is a prize which singles out those who have made great contributions to Israeli life and culture. It's kind of like the Israeli Nobel Prize. So if you are an amazing person in Israel, this is kind of your life achievement award. It is also the time for the International Bible Contest, where people will compete to show how much of the Tanakh they know. It is also when the IDF will do many showcases and flyovers and tours of the bases to show the military, which of course is part of every Israeli's life since there is a mandatory draft. And of course, because this is a holiday in spring, many Israelis will use the day for picnics and outings. So it is in that way, again, very similar to the 4th of July in America, although usually they have better weather than we do in July, especially here in Florida. Questions? Okay. Now, the question then becomes religiously, how do we handle Yom HaAtzmaut? There is a debate of whether or not we treat Yom HaAtzmaut as a miracle, as a nes, because, well, it does kind of feel miraculous. After almost 2,000 years for Israel to come out of nowhere to be reestablished as an independent country is kind of an amazing event in the annals of human history, and of course is a rather important event in the annals of Jewish history. So the conservative movement and some others have said that when the day of Yom HaAtzmaut comes around, that we should celebrate with Ala Nisim, which is the special prayer that is included in the Amidah, and it parallels the same style of blessing that we say on the holidays of Hanukkah and on the holidays of Purim, the two holidays when we celebrate the massive attack against Jewishness that was repelled and we succeeded in living. We also include the recitation of Hallel. Hallel is recited for all of the great miracles of deliverance for our people. We also have a special reading from the Torah, taken from Deuteronomy 7:12 through 8:18, and we read a Haftarah taken from Isaiah 10:32 to 12:6. However, these practices are not obligatory. This is not something that we have said is a mitzvah, a commandment, but instead are practices that we have chosen to take on as a way of celebrating the specialness of the reestablishment of Israel. So it's a very important and wonderful thing to do religiously, but if for some reason you are unable to or unwilling, that is okay. Like I said, there is still some debate about whether or not we should view Israel as being a full divine miracle, or whether we should view it as the prelude to a miracle, or whether we should view it as simply a wonderful secular event and not claim any divine sanction for it. There are people who take all sides of those positions. There are also, unfortunately, I should point out, some people who take the opposite position, which in my opinion is not okay, that Israel should not have been reestablished without the coming of Mashiach first, without the Messiah. And those people, usually a very small portion of the ultra-Orthodox community, do continue to complain and protest the existence of Israel. Aaron, your hand is up.
Yeah, Rabbi, is the reason it's non-obligatory is because there's not enough agreement on it? Because aren't those customs obligatory on the other holidays?
Well, the customs are only obligatory when they've been accepted by everyone.
Right.
So so a custom within one town in America, or one town in Yemen, or one town in Spain does not become obligatory to every other community in the world. So yes, if all the Jews around the world were to accept this as being binding upon themselves, then this would become obligatory. I can give you a good parallel also from our recent holiday cycle. At the end, on the final day of all of our major holidays, we have a ceremony called Yizkor. This service is a special memorial ceremony, which most people use as a way of reflecting upon the loss of their loved ones over the years. However, Yizkor was established back after the First Crusades, about 1,000 years ago, as a way of commemorating all of the thousands of people who were murdered by the Crusaders, many of whom had no one, because entire villages were wiped out. Many of them had no one to still be able to keep their memories alive. Now, Yizkor is very powerful and universally practiced within the Ashkenazic world. It has not become universal within the Sephardic world. So I couldn't imagine an Ashkenazic community not having Yizkor, but that doesn't mean that it is obligatory on all Jews everywhere. Make sense?
Yeah, so it's basically the lack of uniformity that prevents it from being obligatory, right?
Yes. If it were accepted by everyone, then it would be obligatory upon everyone. It's what I like to call one of the hints of Judaism's soft democracy, meaning that once everybody has bought into a particular agreement and arrangement, then yes, it becomes binding upon all of us, but no one group can impose that upon everyone without their consent.
Right. All right.
I had a question, Rabbi.
Yes.
Is when you say it's the some ultra Orthodox that hold that position,
Yes.
Kind of opposing to the mainstream. I mean, I'm assuming these aren't ultra Orthodox in Israel, right? I mean, is it?
No, there are. There are some groups, small groups, a few thousand people within Israel that oppose Israel itself as a secular entity.
Interesting.
Well, it's in every country, you are likely to have small groups of people who are opposed to the current government or governmental form that they have. We even fought a whole war about that in America. But to this day, there are still people. As we just passed, I believe it was the 25th or 30th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing by someone who also thought that our government was illegitimate in America. Thankfully, the people in Israel have not resorted to terrorism in this way, but they can make an awful lot of noise. But they believe that Israel should not be a Jewish state, that it should be run by others, and that it should only remain like that until the Messiah comes.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, it was interesting.
Well, like I said, politics and beliefs can lead to some very interesting behaviors. Okay, so moving back a day, and there's a reason why I put it in this order. We're moving back to the 4th of Iyar, which is one day before Yom HaAtzmaut, and this is Yom HaZikaron. By the way, if you haven't picked up on the little clue here, the word Yom means day in Hebrew. That's why all of these holidays begin with the phrase Yom. Yom HaShoah, Yom HaAtzmaut, Yom HaZikaron, the day of the Holocaust, the day of independence, the day of remembrance. Hebrew puts the word day first in the grammatical structure. So the full name of Yom HaZikaron, I will try to do my best not to tongue-tie myself on this, is Yom HaZikaron Lechalei Ma'acharot Yisrael V'Lanifga'ei Fulot Eva, which is the day of remembrance for Israeli fallen soldiers and for the victims of terrorism. Now, it is always shortened to Yom HaZikaron, except for official announcements and official ceremonies. And the idea is this is the day of remembrance. The comparable day in the United States would be Memorial Day, when we commemorate those who have fallen in defense of the United States. On Yom HaZikaron, they commemorate those who have fallen in defense of the land of Israel, or as victims of those who have attacked Israel for the simple crime of existing. Now, originally, Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom HaZikaron were the same day. They were both held on the 5th of Iyar. Families found it awfully hard to mourn their loved ones and celebrate independence on the same day. You could imagine if the 4th of July and Memorial Day were together, you would basically be trying to decide, do I visit the cemetery or do I visit the park? Do I cry or do I rejoice? And so eventually they decided to separate these two events. And the 4th of Iyar, the day before, was selected in 1951. And then it was officially made law in 1963 to have that be the Remembrance Day. There is a 1-minute siren at 8 p.m. and a 2-minute siren at 11 a.m. That will give people, again, a chance to come to a stop, to stand, to remember, and to be silent in their reflections on those who have paid the ultimate price in defense of the land of Israel. The day concludes by raising the flag back to full mast and the beginning then of Yom HaAtzmaut celebration. So in this way, emotionally, there is actually a very natural cathartic process where people will remember those who have fallen, and then they will be able to celebrate having paid honor to those who have helped earn the independence of the country. And emotionally, I can say from having experienced this both in Israel as well as outside, this pattern does have a very powerful emotional arc to it. And it does lead to a deeper celebration of independence than just going to a barbecue straight with nothing else. Now, Yom HaZikaron, like Yom HaAtzmaut, is celebrated abroad. In the United States, you'll often find Yom HaZikaron commemorations are coordinated by the expat Israeli groups in conjunction with the local non-Israeli Jewish community. But you have to check with each city you live in to see exactly how it's being handled. That is how it's handled generally in Orlando. This year, of course, things are going to be a little different. Question?
Rabbi,
Yes.
I got one. Just out of curiosity, how much are the non-Jewish soldiers celebrated in this holiday? Because I remember there was a problem with that like 2 years ago or last year.
So I wouldn't say that there's a problem with the celebration for the non-Jewish soldiers, but what actually happens is let me explain in general, and then I'll talk about the controversy that did happen. So in general, non-Jewish soldiers who serve in the Israeli military are also commemorated at this time, whether they be Christian, Muslim, or Druze, which is another religious minority in Israel. And their sacrifice is also honored. The issue that you're referring to is there is a ceremony where they will place a marker of remembrance on the most recent casualty from within the Jewish community on that day. And this is something that is done by the president of Israel, which is mostly a ceremonial role, not like the prime minister. A few years ago, one of the most recent casualty was someone who had come from the former Soviet Union and who was not considered Jewish according to the rabbinic courts, although he obviously self-identified as Jewish, and that was the reason why he had been able to make Aliyah, to immigrate to Israel. So what happened was a question of snubbing him because he wasn't officially Jewish in the eyes of some, and going to a different grave of someone who was more universally recognized. And that was considered highly offensive by both the members of the community that came from the former Soviet Union, as well as the general Israeli population, who, of course, were appalled that his sacrifice was not being given the same honor as someone else's. But that wasn't that he was non-Jewish of another faith. It was because his Jewishness was in doubt because of the way the politics of the Israeli rabbinic courts, unfortunately, currently operate.
But why wouldn't they acknowledge the death of a non-Jewish person?
Well, they do, but the problem is that he was not able to be buried within a Jewish cemetery. And there is, although Israel does not technically have Judaism as an official religion, little trivia fact there, there is a very heavy overlay of Judaism and Jewishness when it comes to many of the official state ceremonies. And so a special commemoration of the Jewish fallen soldier has always been a highlight of the Yom HaZikaron ceremony. Obviously, many people have questioned that in general, but as a marker of the Jewishness of the state, it wasn't considered exceptionally problematic until it happened that somebody who certainly felt Jewish and who by their community was felt to be Jewish was being snubbed.
Was that a like Reform versus conservative versus Orthodox issue?
Not exactly. I mean, a little bit of orthodoxy, but what happened is that the former Soviet Union was very, very antithetical to Judaism. Living an open Jewish life in the Soviet Union was extremely difficult and often subjected to persecution. And so many Jewish people lived Jewishly underground or kept their Jewish identity but did not practice Judaism. And that meant that over time it was sometimes difficult to establish the heritage of an individual as being definitely Jewish according to Jewish law. However, according to the current rules of immigration to Israel, as long as you can show at least one grandparent as being Jewish, you are allowed to move into the land of Israel and to take advantage of what's called the right of return. But coming back as a citizen does not immediately grant you religious status recognition by the Orthodox courts. And so that's where this kerfuffle happened, because the Orthodox courts are involved in personal status issues of who can be married, of where people can be buried, and things like that. And this is the result. This is something, however, that the conservative movement and the reform movements, as well as many other Israelis, have been advocating for a change of for decades. Unfortunately, the political system in Israel is such that there has been very little progress on trying to get full religious recognition or at least an easier path for conversion in order to ratify this person's identity under the current system. Okay, on to, hello, there we go. On to Yom Yerushalayim. As I said at the very outset, this is a slightly less prominent day within the calendar. It certainly still has a interesting role to play in Israel, a bit less of a role to play outside of Israel, and as Aaron hinted at the beginning, still some political issues. So Yom Yerushalayim is celebrated on the 28th day of Iyar. Usually this is sometime in around June. Depends, remember, the Jewish calendar and the solar calendar do not always line up the same way. And you may remember from learning about Israeli history that in 1948, when the UN partitioned the British-controlled territory, that would become Israel, part was given to the Jewish majority, part was given to a Muslim majority, and Jerusalem was planned to be an international city, which neither new country controlled. Didn't work out that way. In the war that immediately followed, Jerusalem ended up being divided between Israel and Jordan. And by divided, I don't mean they sat down and agreed to divide Jerusalem. I mean they set down their barbed wire and machine guns and were able to hold positions along a certain line that ended up having a de facto division of the city. Israel had what is referred to as the new city, and Jordan had what is called the old city, which, if we look at a map here, can you all see where my mouse hand is waving around? Yes, no? I don't know whether my mouse is visible or whether I need to turn on the special spotlight thing. I'm sort of circling over the map.
It's visible.
It's visible, thank you, okay. So in 1948, when the war began, or rather when the war finished, you have what's called the Green Line, which is not green on this drawing, which divided the city of Jerusalem along this line. Now, if you look over here, you'll see a little sort of outline. This is what's called the Old City. That is your postcard Jerusalem. When you are looking at clips or videos or pictures of Jerusalem, it's always going to show an old medieval looking wall, a big building with a golden dome. That is all inside the Old City, which is just that tiny little bit there that is surrounded by this hard line. And when Israel was fighting in 48 and 49, they were able to push, as you can see in the small map up here, push into the middle of their enemy's advance, trying to both secure the large Jewish population that lived within the western side of Jerusalem, the new city, as well as the old city. In the end, they were unsuccessful in capturing the old city, and they also did not completely reconnect to the Jewish groups that were on Mount Scopus, which are just outside on the edge. So this left things very, very difficult until 1967. In 1967, in the Six-Day War, Israel was able to retake the entire area. If you look at the area that's marked as West Bank in the map in the upper right-hand corner, Israel was able to go all the way up to the Jordan River. They could have gone further, but that was all that they were hoping to secure. And that meant that now the old city was part of Jerusalem as well, the new city. That then became Yom Yerushalayim, the day that Jerusalem was reunified. Now, in order to understand why this was such a powerful emotional time, it's not just because of the name Jerusalem. From 1948 to 1967, the Jordanians, who were in control of the area outside of that line, who had annexed that to their own country, they destroyed much of the historical and cultural sites within the Jewish quarter of the Old City. There have been Jews living within the Jewish quarter of the Old City for thousands of years, and that was wiped out by the Jordanians. They also would attack Israelis, and they were trusting that the Israelis would not retaliate. So if you go to Israel to this day and you go to the area, especially right outside the Old City, you will find buildings from that era on the Israeli side that are just raked with bullet holes, because snipers and machine gunners from the Jordanian army would sit on the walls of Jerusalem, and they would simply take pot shots at the occasional Israeli in the new city just across the no man's land in between the two. This was a difficult period. And of course, that meant that from 1948 to 1967, no Jews were allowed to enter the old city of Jerusalem. Jews were absolutely barred from coming into that space. And that was the first time, like I said, for almost 2,000 years that Jews had not been able to be in Jerusalem. In 1967, you can then imagine the relief and the joy at being able to go back into the city and being able to unify it and to actually give the fullness of the city for the first time under Jewish rule and Jewish independent rule for more than 2,000 years. Questions on the history of that? Okay, so what do we do? Well, after its capture, the government established again an annual day of celebration on the anniversary, and there are special cultural and political events that happen on that day. There is a special quote that is recited by, that is from Moshe Dayan, who was the general that was the architect of the stunning victory of the Six-Day War, which reads as follows. This morning, the Israeli Defense Forces liberated Jerusalem. We have united Jerusalem, the divided capital of Israel. We have returned to the holiest of our holy places, never to part from it again. To our Arab neighbors, we extend also at this hour, and with added emphasis at this hour, our hand in peace. And to our Christian and Muslim fellow citizens, we solemnly promise full religious freedom and rights. We did not come to Jerusalem for the sake of other people's holy places, and not to interfere with the adherents of other faiths, but in order to safeguard its entirety and to live there together with others in unity. So Moshe Dayan, and indeed Israeli law, establishes that all of the Muslim sites remain under Muslim control, all of the Christian sites remain under Christian control, and Jewish sites are under Jewish control. That there should be freedom of religion, and that Arabs, Muslim, Christian, Jews of all types can come and go and worship in Jerusalem with freedom. There are occasional arguments among the Jews, but among the other groups, that has generally been a very satisfactory arrangement. And as I said, that was not the arrangement, unfortunately, between 1948 and 1967, when Jerusalem was in Jordanian control. All right, so Aaron asked at the beginning about the politics of Yom Yerushalayim, about what would happen were Israel to ever make a peace agreement with the Palestinians or other nations. When Israel, I'm going to flip back to the map here, when Israel speaks of Jerusalem as being important to Judaism, the Jewish sites are clustered around the old city. Even though the current municipal boundaries of Jerusalem extend way, way out to a very large suburban area, that does not mean that those areas are religiously or culturally significant to Jews. Now, there are some new suburbs in the last 20, 30 years that have grown up that do have a large population, and any agreement would certainly involve some sort of mutually agreed upon land swaps to include those suburbs which are just outside the old city. But to continue to allow some presence in the East Jerusalem area for the Palestinians to establish their capital, and some form of safe access for people coming from the Palestinian area into the old city is very plausible. There is no reason why that cannot happen with a mutually agreed upon peace plan. Not everyone in Israel agrees with that. Not everyone in the Palestinian territories agree with that. But most people who are of at least the optimistic belief that there can be peace imagines that there would be such an agreement. The idea, though, that the Jewish sites would ever be relinquished to another power, that would be a hard sell. As I mentioned, it has always been accessible when the Jews have been in control of it. It has not been accessible when others were in control of it. And it would take a great deal of trust building to relinquish that control. Although, as I mentioned, the current authority to administer to many of those sites is still held by the religious authorities in Jordan. So it's not as though Israel is exercising any authority over them, only a sort of standoff security presence to make sure that nothing horrible would happen there.
But Rabbi, the deal I was actually talking about was the one you see advocated by J Street, the return to the 1967 lines.
Right. So yes. So when people talk about the 1967 lines, which again is this what's affectionately called the green line, when most people are talking about that, they say that that should be the basis for negotiation. Obviously, there are some on both sides that completely disagree with that notion. But at least from what I have seen of J Street, and they may have changed their advocacy of late, I haven't looked recently, they say that 1967 lines should be the foundation for the negotiation, not that 1967 lines should be the end of the negotiation. And that is no different than the American or indeed the official Israeli position, that the armistice line of 1949, the green line, would be the foundation for having the discussion of what would and would not be on each side.
Under those lines, Jerusalem would be under a Palestinian state, the old city of Jerusalem.
As a starting position in negotiation, yes. But the idea is not, at least from what I have seen from J Street, like I said, I haven't checked them recently, is not that they are advocating that should be the final arrangement, only that a negotiation should begin with the border from 67, known as the 49 Armistice Line or the Green Line, as the beginning of those negotiations. It's much like if you were going to talk to your neighbor about swapping some land, you would start off by saying, okay, here's our property line. Now I want your tree and you want this hill. So now we can talk about what we're trading. But if you don't talk about the initial line, it's very hard to know who's giving and who's receiving from the negotiation. And like I said, both America and Israel also, whenever they are putting together proposals, begin with the Green Line as the starting place and say, okay, this is what the general shape looks like, but we think we should take this and we should give that, or we think you should give this and we can take that. There is the give and take around that line as your beginning point. If you look at any map that's ever been trotted out by any side for a discussion of creating a Palestinian state, it always begins roughly around the 49 Armistice Line. So there's nothing radical about saying that. Now, when people say it has to be that line with no change, that's where you begin to get problems.
Right. But from what I've seen on the news, it basically says no Arab country would accept a peace deal without Jerusalem, and then the Jewish state saying the same thing. We would not accept a peace deal without. All right.
All right. So yes, yeah. At the very end of the day, what's going to happen in this tiny little corner of the map is indeed, when we're talking about the old city of Jerusalem, which is really the sticking point. The outside areas, except for some of the suburbs, are not such a big issue. But just the old city and the cluster of Jewish sites around it, that's really the main sticking point. Right. And whether or not they will or won't accept any changes to that, well, like I said, I cannot imagine a Jewish government giving up the old city, but I could imagine the Jewish government giving up many parts of the outer areas that are not, they don't really have a Jewish history and they don't have a Jewish presence. There would be many Jews who would be opposed to that, don't get me wrong, but I believe the majority would probably be okay with that if it was the right kind of deal. Vice versa, obviously there are many Muslims who want Israel gone completely from the map, every Jew pushed into the ocean, but I believe that also many moderates would be willing to work out some sort of arrangement if they believe that it would give them free access to the holy sites within the old city. But we're not going to settle that agreement here tonight.
Didn't Omar offer them that?
And whether or not people who were negotiating in the past gave up deals that might have been great deals and did so perhaps for their own detriment, that'll be something for history to judge. But then we're going to get completely into our discussion of the peace process and all the different failed attempts to create a resolution, which could have gone differently. Okay, so nowadays in Israel, Yom Yerushalayim is still there. It doesn't exactly inspire the same massive public celebration as it used to. As Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz said, and Steinsaltz, if you don't know his name, is one of the greats within the Jewish world. He said, at its inception, Jerusalem Day was a glorious day. This feeling was to a great extent bound up with the Six-Day War and its outcome, which for a while produced an exalted feeling of release from dread and anxiety to liberation, well-being, and greatness. Over the years, however, the aura of the day has dimmed. Right? That victory of the Six-Day War was absolutely revolutionary in not just the military relief it brought, but the spiritual, the sense of euphoric, we will exist feeling that it brought. Israel has come to accept its existence as now being sort of just there. It has not felt the existential dread since the Yom Kippur War, which is now going on 40 plus years. And so therefore, Yom Yerushalayim does not have quite the same impact emotionally that it used to, but it is still an important day. And within the conservative movement and a few others, we do mark it. So we also recite Hallel on this day. This was promoted as well by the chief rabbi of Israel. However, many other groups do not celebrate the day with any liturgical changes or additions. And that takes us through our modern holidays. When we get together next week, we're going to talk about the holiday of Shavuot, as well as the counting of the Omer, which we are in the middle of. Again, something I would have liked to have gone. Something I would have liked to have gone over during Pesach, but the holiday just didn't permit this year. So look forward to that for next week at 6 p.m. Any final questions before we stop for tonight?
No.
All right. Take care, everyone. Stay safe. Keep yourself informed about everything that's going on. And remember to be on the WhatsApp. Keep an eye out for emails. Continue to text me or email me directly if you have any questions. Take care, everyone.